When Abigail started her third job, a temp position at the Juno Mart distribution center north of Elridge, she no longer felt like she was undercover. She wasn't playing a role anymore. She had truly become part of the invisible network of people who quietly pushed through for minimum wage, for their kids, for dreams that had been postponed until there's time. Every morning, she worked among towering steel shelves, where the beeping of barcode scanners sounded like the ticking of a countdown clock, ticking away at human endurance. Here, she met more second Letitias, 50-year-old men with hunched backs from hauling cargo 12 hours a day. Young women hiding ultrasound reports in their pockets so the managers wouldn't find out, and college students working night shifts to pay tuition but being forced into last-minute overtime without notice. They all had one thing in common: no one dared to complain, because in every office, every warehouse, every branch, there was a Craig Sloan, not the same name, but the same way of seeing employees as numbers, not the same voice, but the same mindset. Pressure brings performance. One late afternoon, Abigail heard a scuffle near the shipping area. A young worker named Malik had been shoved off the line for accidentally dropping a box and was berated by the supervisor in front of everyone. "We don't need clumsy hands here. Go back to school before you come back to work." Abigail stepped forward to intervene, but Malik turned and walked away. Eyes red. No one said a word. She turned to a woman standing nearby and asked, "Does stuff like this happen often?" The woman looked at her, face blank. "Around here, if you speak up, your next shift disappears. Everyone knows that." Abigail stood still, stunned. She realized she had been wrong, not just because she had become disconnected from reality, but because from the beginning she had believed the system was only broken in a few people, but in truth, the entire system was crushing good people by rewarding indifference. That night, she reopened the internal reports she had once approved: productivity graphs, cost-cutting breakdowns, awards for the most efficient overtime branches. All of it praised performance, never once asking, "Is the human behind this number still surviving?" She wrote in her journal, "A system can function while still killing trust." And the cruelest part is that we reward those who suffocate it the best, for the first time. Abigail didn't just see her company suffering financial losses. She saw it bleeding trust daily, hourly, in places no one was looking, and if anything was going to be salvaged, she would have to rebuild it from the very soul of the organization. On an early spring morning, Abigail awoke in her quiet apartment, her eyes fixed on the small crack in the ceiling above. Today was the day she returned to Juno Mart headquarters as CEO. No longer Abby Lane of Elridge, not as a part-time bookstore worker, but as the woman now carrying the responsibility of reviving an organization that had lost its soul. At Juno Mart headquarters in Greenville, South Carolina, everything still moved as if nothing had changed. Coffee brewed automatically in the corner machine. Meeting schedules filled every line on the digital boards. Office staff passed one another like branded ghosts. Abigail stepped into the elevator wearing her old coat, unnoticed by everyone. When the doors to the executive boardroom opened, The chief operating officer's eyes widened. Good grief. Where have you been this past month? We thought you were off on some international market research trip. Abigail didn't smile. She looked around the room at the same people who had once approved budgets, revised reform plans, and unintentionally legalized a system that suffocated thousands. She spoke slowly. I wasn't doing market research. I was working in a warehouse, restocking grocery shelves, selling sandwiches, and I was fired from Juno Mart on my very first day. The room fell silent, not because they didn't understand, but because they couldn't believe it was real. 1 week later, Abigail sent out a summons to all regional managers and mid-level HR officers nationwide for an emergency meeting at headquarters. The email's subject line read only one thing: today, we're not going to talk about growth. We're going to talk about how to stop being the reason good people walk away. Among the names on the invite list were two that puzzled many: Leticia Moreno, a sales associate from the Elridge branch; Craig Sloan, the manager of that same branch, the man who had once fired Abigail. No one knew why, but everyone sensed something big was coming. The night before the meeting, Abigail sat down to write her speech, not to defend her track record, not to point fingers, but to tell one simple truth. She had once believed she was a good leader, until her own company rejected her. Early the next morning, Abigail stood before the Juno Mart headquarters, beneath the logo she had proudly named and nurtured for the past 12 years. But today, she wasn't there to lead. She was there to start over, as someone who had once been swallowed by silence. The largest conference room at Juno Mart HQ was not just packed that morning, it was tight with tension. Over 120 people from branches across the country had gathered: regional managers, team leads, HR reps, finance officers, everyone dressed sharp, holding laptops and notebooks, ready for a textbook corporate meeting. But when Abigail walked in, no blazer, no PowerPoint slides, just a woman who had once been fired in Elridge. The room fell silent. At the very back of the room sat Leticia Moreno, quiet, wearing a simple dress, her eyes filled with anxious uncertainty. Next to her sat Craig Sloan, stiff-backed, his face tight with the sudden realization that he was now seated in the middle of a stage where he no longer controlled the script. Abigail stepped up to the podium. She didn't open any documents. She simply looked straight at everyone and began. I used to think I understood Juno Mart. I read every report, approved every budget, signed off on every reform plan. She paused for a beat. But not once did I know what it felt like to work a night shift and not have enough money for cold medicine. Not once did I understand what it's like to be humiliated in front of your co-workers for a mistake caused by the system. And I had certainly never been fired simply because no one thought I deserved to learn. Whispers stirred around the room. Abigail continued. I spent 5 weeks as a new employee. I was called a burden, looked down on for asking questions, and fired without anyone even bothering to ask my real name. She turned toward Craig, not with blame, not with anger, just with a gaze that left no room for confusion. I was Abby Lane, the person you signed off to terminate. Craig froze. Letitia covered her mouth in shock. The entire room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out. Abigail took a deep breath, her voice now trembling not out of fear, but because what she was about to say truly mattered. I'm not standing here to take credit. I'm standing here to say I'm sorry. Because I led from too high up, so high I couldn't hear the exhausted breaths on the floors below. She paused, scanning the room. But I'm also standing here to say this: we will change, not to protect market share, but to protect people. She then announced 3 major decisions. A 22% increase in the company-wide minimum wage exceeding the retail industry standard. A new scholarship program for veteran employees who want to return to school. The creation of an internal culture council composed of branch-level employees to review and reform management practices across the system. She declared firmly, "Starting today, we will no longer reward those who maintain high KPIs through pressure. We will reward those who know how to maintain their team's trust." At the back of the room, Letitia began to cry, not out of surprise, but because for the first time in 12 years, she felt seen. Abigail stepped down from the podium and walked straight to her, not for drama, but because it was the only right thing to do. The 2 women embraced, and everyone in the room stood and applauded. Not the forced clapping you hear at year-end briefings, but the kind of applause that rises when a truth finally breaks through after years of silence. And Craig, he didn't walk away. He stood quietly, eyes unsure, as Abigail turned to him and asked, "Do you want to stay?" Craig swallowed hard. 1 second, then 2. Finally, he answered, "If you're still willing to give me a chance. I want to start over, not as a manager, but as someone who needs to relearn what it means to be human." After that historic meeting, the entire Juno Mart headquarters felt like it had been shaken not by numbers, but by a belief that had just been awakened. Messages began spreading across the internal network. The CEO actually worked in a warehouse. She really was fired. Letitia was invited to the executive meeting, and for the first time in years, the HR department received a flood of thank you emails from frontline employees, not because of the raise, but because, finally, someone was listening. Back in Elridge, Letitia became a quiet symbol of resilience. No spotlight, no grand speeches. She kept working at the same branch, but now, every time a new employee walked through the door, she was the first to greet them with, "Here, dreams don't get boxed up anymore. Say it out loud, I'll listen." She also received a special scholarship from the back-to-school program Abigail launched and re-enrolled in psychology courses at the nearby community college. As for Craig Sloan, everyone expected him to quit. Some even placed friendly bets in the office pool. No way he lasts a week. But he didn't leave. At an internal meeting at the Elridge branch, Craig walked in no suit, no commanding voice, but a different Craig entirely. Dark circles under his eyes, visibly tired but humble. He stood before the entire team, hesitated for a few seconds, and then said, "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to apologize for letting my own harshness become the reason people were afraid to come to work." The room was dead silent. "If you'll allow me, I want to start from scratch, not to relearn management skills, but to learn how to respect people." No one applauded, but no one turned away either. And in that silence, something shifted. Over the next 3 months, Craig did exactly what he promised. He started by asking Letitia to retrain him on the basics of customer service. He joined the night shift rotation, rode along for early morning warehouse deliveries. He placed an anonymous suggestion box next to the water cooler and every week read every single note aloud at staff meetings without skipping a line. One day, when a young employee accidentally knocked over an entire display shelf, Craig didn't shout. He grabbed a cloth, knelt down to help clean up, and said, "I've made bigger mistakes and people forgave me. You'll be okay." Word of Craig's transformation spread across the entire company. From a symbol of toxic leadership, he became one of the leading forces rebuilding the culture of Juno Mart. He even declined the offer from headquarters to be promoted as a new manager trainer, just so he could stay in Elridge for another year. He said, "I'm not done yet, not with myself, and not with the people who once had to bow their heads because of me." At Juno Mart's first Positive Culture Awards ceremony after the company's reform, Craig and Letitia stood side by side, receiving the award together. One was once the symbol of fear, the other the symbol of silent endurance. Now, they stood as living proof that anyone can begin again if they have the courage to face themselves first. 6 months after that defining meeting, the Elridge branch was no longer the red-marked name at the bottom of internal reports. It wasn't the top-performing branch either, but it had become the place everyone wanted to transfer to, because there, people had begun to believe going to work shouldn't mean losing yourself. Letitia Moreno, the woman who once thought she'd spend her life just getting by, was now head of Southern Region Community Training. Each week, she taught at 3 different branches, guiding new employees not only in customer service skills, but in how to preserve kindness in a high-pressure workplace. On her first day teaching in Greenville at headquarters, Letitia opened her session with a sentence that made the entire conference room fall silent. "I once stood at an old register, trying to figure out how to apply a discount code. Now I'm standing here to help make sure you never forget why you started." Craig Sloan remained in Elridge, this time as a culture transition advisor, no longer in operations management. He started a coffee talk group every Wednesday where employees could come together over a warm cup and share anything: frustrations, suggestions, or even just a story from their week. And for the first time ever, in the anonymous mid-year survey, the Elridge branch received an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a positive and human-centered work environment. That number didn't say everything, but the look in people's eyes as they walked out of their shifts, lighter, prouder, said it all. And Abigail Rowan. She no longer returned regularly to the executive office. Instead, she chose to work at a different branch each month. No announcements, no cameras, just a woman who wanted to listen closely. And every weekend, She returned to Elridge, where she had a quiet routine of sitting on the bench outside the grocery store with a cup of coffee and her handwritten journal. One afternoon, a little girl around 7 approached her and asked, "Are you the boss lady?" Abigail smiled. "No, I'm just someone who got lost, and a small town showed me the way back." Elridge once considered the scar of Juno Mart had become the company's new heart, not because it was wealthier, but because it remembered who it was. If you were to ask Abigail Rowan what the most important moment of her entire leadership career was, she wouldn't talk about mergers, growth charts, or big press conferences. She would tell you about the night she got fired for the first time in a small store in Elridge, because in that very moment, she stopped leading from above. She started listening from below. Abigail's story isn't just about a CEO who got fired, not just about a manager who changed, not just about a long-time employee who got a second chance at school. It's about the courage to return to the place where you were once silent and begin again, with an apology. Every system will fail at some point. Every policy will have its cracks. But what allows an organization to survive isn't the absence of mistakes. It's having enough people willing to stand up and make things right. Abigail once wrote in her journal, "We're always looking for inspiring leaders on stage. But sometimes, the leader we need most is the one willing to kneel into the darkest corners of the system and ask a simple question. Are you okay? If you are a leader, step away from your desk just once. Go to the place where the weakest person in your organization is trying not to collapse. Listen, not to control, but to understand, not to correct, but to connect. And if you are an employee tired of being overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten, please remember you are not invisible, you are not alone, and you deserve to be seen for exactly who you are. Because in the end, a strong company isn't where people run the fastest, it's where the slowest aren't left behind. If today you feel small in a system that never seems to hear you, then please believe there are still people willing to take a step back just to see you more clearly. And if you carry power, no matter how big or small, remember sometimes the most powerful kind of leadership is sitting down beside someone who's falling and saying, "I see you, and I won't leave you behind." A CEO got fired on her very first day working at her own company. Sounds absurd. It actually happened, and no, this wasn't part of a hidden camera prank. It took place in a small grocery store in the town of Elridge, where no one recognized the woman with soft brown hair and a few wrinkles from sleepless nights. As the highest-ranking executive of Juno Mart, a retail chain that once operated across every southern state, she wasn't there for an inspection, not there to check KPIs or attend executive meetings. She came in as a nobody, applying for a night shift, because she wanted to understand why the entire system was collapsing from the inside. But on that very first day, before she could even memorize all the employees' names while still figuring out how to use the barcode scanner, she was fired. The reason? You ask too many questions. You're too slow, and you don't fit our store culture. The person who signed her termination notice had no idea he had just fired the nationwide CEO. The one person who could shut down the entire branch with a single phone call. And what made that woman smile as she peeled the name tag Abby off her chest wasn't satisfaction, but because she knew, for the first time in her many years as a leader, she had truly seen what financial reports could never show. And if you've ever believed that a leader must always be strong, decisive, and powerful, then today's story might just change your mind. Because sometimes, the greatest transformation doesn't begin from the CEO's office, but from a night shift, a moment of humiliation, and a woman who chose silence in order to truly listen. Abigail Rowan, CEO of the Juno Mart retail chain, now carried a different name, Abby Lane. No private driver, no consultant schedule, no VIP perks. She stood in line like everyone else applying for the job, holding a printed application from a nearby law office's public computer, hair tied neatly back, barefaced, and speaking with a carefully practiced local accent. The Juno Mart store in Elridge sat quietly off the main road, nestled between a pastry shop and a rusting parking lot. She didn't choose this location by chance. She chose it because it had ranked dead last in sales and customer satisfaction for the past 18 months. As she walked in, the first person to greet her was Letitia Moreno, the training staff member, a woman in her late 30s with dark circles under her eyes, yet still carrying the patient resilience of someone well acquainted with disappointment. "Hi, Abby. Welcome to the pressure cooker we call Juno Mart," Letitia said half-jokingly, handing her a faded plastic name tag and a wrinkled uniform. Less than an hour later, Abigail was given a brief rundown of the place: the stockroom, the checkout counter, the refrigerators, and the so-called break corner, which was really just a broken chair beside a malfunctioning coffee machine. Letitia was the only one who showed any real warmth, though her voice often broke from constant coughing. She shared that she'd worked there for over 12 years, ever since her second child was born. "At first, I just meant to stay a few months. But then, life happened." Abigail followed Letitia through inventory checks, floor mopping, how to apply discount codes, how to respond to customer complaints, all the things she had only ever seen summarized in executive reports. And in those very moments, she realized the first painful truth. Here, no one believed anymore that effort would be recognized. They worked like machines, not out of laziness, but because they had given up hope. Every barcode scan, every customer greeting was drained of emotion, as if they were trapped in an endless loop of meaningless days. But deeper than the exhaustion was something worse: invisibility. Abigail realized no one in this system truly saw one another. Managers didn't see their employees, headquarters didn't see the branches, and no one saw Letitia as a human being. At the end of her first day, Abigail scribbled a note in her journal. "I used to think Juno Mart needed a product overhaul, but maybe what we need to change first is the way we see people." The next morning, Abigail arrived 30 minutes early, not because she was eager to work, but because she wanted to observe from afar, in silence, from the parking lot. She saw Letitia struggling to pull open the jammed steel door, her hands trembling in the cold wind. Inside, a group of younger employees quietly stocked shelves. No one talked. No one smiled. The store opened like a place where no one really wanted the day to begin. Then he walked in, Craig Sloan, the branch manager, slim-fit suit, slicked-back hair, polished shoes, but his voice was sharp as a blade. "Why are we still missing 3 units of soda from yesterday's inventory? Letitia." "Did you count with your eyes shut?" Letitia, who had been wiping down a shelf, froze mid-motion. "I think it might have been a late shipment. I'll double-check." "You think we don't do, I think here. I want results, not excuses." "Got it." Craig emphasized every word like he was scolding a child. Abigail stood just a few steps away, her heart tightening. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could be touched. Letitia lowered her head, saying nothing. No one else spoke up. They just kept stacking items as if public humiliation was something they had grown numb to. Abigail had heard of toxic management culture in internal surveys, but she had never imagined it could be this specific and cold. Craig turned to a new employee named Tyler and pointed at a stack of milk cartons misaligned on a pallet. "What is this placement? Huh? You got a brain in there, or do I need to draw you a diagram step by step?" Tyler turned pale. He looked no older than 19. He tried to realign the boxes, but his hands were visibly trembling. Abigail stepped closer to Letitia and whispered, "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" Letitia gave a faint, tired smile. "People used to. Then they quit." The ones who stayed learned how to stay quiet. That day, Abigail didn't write anything in her notebook. She went home, opened her laptop, and pulled up the report titled Branch Performance Review, Elridge, that the HR team had sent last month. The first line read, "Manager Craig Sloan demonstrates strong organizational skills, firm target enforcement, and maintains performance at an acceptable level." Abigail stared at that line, then asked herself, if this is considered acceptable, then who exactly should have been fired first? Her shift ended at 8 p.m. She quickly cleaned up checkout lane number 3, the same lane where she'd spent the whole day being criticized by customers for being too slow just because she asked too many questions about the return policy. She never imagined the day would come when she'd feel real pressure from a system she herself had once signed off on, while changing out of her uniform in the small break room. Craig Sloan called out to her, "Short, expressionless Abby, step into my office for a moment." She nodded, not knowing what was coming, and not expecting that the next few seconds would become one of the most absurd moments of her entire life. Craig sat with one leg crossed, leaning back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers. "I'll be direct," he said. "I don't think you're a good fit here." Abigail furrowed her brow, sitting up straight. "I don't understand. You're slow. You ask too many questions. And honestly, you look like someone always waiting for others to tell her what to do." She was so taken aback that she let out a soft laugh. I'm just trying to learn the process properly." Craig waved dismissively. "I don't have time for the learning type around here. Either you keep up, or you drag everyone down." Then he concluded, as if announcing the weather, "I've decided to let you go. effective immediately. Silence filled the room. Abigail looked straight into Craig's eyes. A part of her wanted to stand up and tell him the truth, that with just one phone call, he would be out of a job before sunrise. But she didn't. Instead, she offered a soft smile, removed the Abby name tag from her chest, and placed it gently on the table. "Thank you for showing me exactly what I needed to see." Craig raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Abigail turned and walked away, leaving behind a cold office and a man who had just fired the CEO of the entire company without even realizing it. Outside, a light rain was falling. Abigail stood under the awning, gazing up at the Juno Mart sign founded over 30 years ago. She had once been proud of saving the chain from bankruptcy just last year, had once believed that overhauling the system was a victory. But now, for the first time, she understood no one can truly reform a system unless they've been rejected by it first. And in that gentle drizzle, Abigail smiled, not because of failure, but because, for the first time, she saw something clearly. Real change, if it's to begin, sometimes has to walk through the first wound. 3 days after being fired, Abigail moved into a small apartment at the end of Mason Street, a neighborhood known for its working-class residents. The apartment was barely 270 square feet, had no reliable heating, a moldy bathroom, and a window overlooking a patch of abandoned land. She set her bag down on the cold tile floor, looked around, and let out a sigh. No driver, no schedule, no business cards, just her, and the reality that so many of her employees had lived through every single day. In the mornings, she got a job at an old bookstore near Elridge High School, stocking and counting inventory for $8 an hour. In the evenings, she washed dishes at a small Mexican diner where she was the oldest person on the team. No one knew who she was, and no one cared. And for the first time in her life, Abigail felt free. No longer the model CEO in every meeting. No longer the woman fielding hundreds of emails each day. She was just a middle-aged woman trying to survive a southern winter with 2 jobs and 3 worn-out sweaters. One late evening, she spotted Leticia Moreno in line at the town church, waiting for a free meal. Leticia noticed her first, pausing in surprise, then walking over. Cautious and stunned. "Abby, is that you? I thought you'd left town." Abigail smiled, clutching a paper food tray. "I still have a few things I want to understand better in Elridge." They sat on the church steps, eating quietly. After a while, Leticia exhaled deeply. "I'm sorry about Craig. He's been treating people like that for years." Abigail shook her head. "It's not your fault. But how have you endured it for so long?" Leticia stared into the dim parking lot, her voice slow and steady. "I have 2 kids. They need food. They need school. And me. I just need a place to hang on." Abigail said nothing, because she knew any words of encouragement at that moment would have sounded hollow. In the days that followed, the 2 women started seeing each other more often, sometimes just crossing paths at the grocery store, sometimes sharing a cheap sandwich for lunch at the park. Abigail listened as Letitia shared stories from her younger years, how she once studied psychology, how that dream was cut short when she had to drop out after getting pregnant. She talked about her husband who died in a car accident while working overtime, and how she arranged the funeral herself because she couldn't afford a service. Once, Letitia let out a small laugh. I used to want to be a school counselor. Now, my daughter's better at psychology than I ever was. Abigail didn't laugh. She just looked at the woman beside her and silently thought, "This is exactly why I have to start over, right here, from the very place everyone thinks is the end." One rainy afternoon, Abigail and Letitia took shelter under the awning of the bookstore where Abigail worked. Letitia clutched her canvas tote full of clearance groceries, shoulders soaked, hands trembling from the cold. Abigail invited her inside and made a cup of hot cocoa. The two women sat across from each other in a space filled with the scent of old paper and the soft hum of jazz playing from a radio. No more beeping scanners, no more punch clocks, just two women with long hidden truths finally breathing in the quiet. Letitia set her cup down, her fingers tracing the rim. "Abby, have you ever felt stuck, even though no one's actually holding you back?" Abigail gave a gentle nod. She didn't say yes, but her eyes told Letitia everything. "I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, things would get better," Letitia said. "Then I realized there are glass ceilings you can't break, not because you're not willing, but because you don't have the degree, the time, or the childcare to go back to school." She paused, then continued, her voice softer. "I once tried to go back to college, wanted to finish my psychology degree. At one point, I was just 3 credits short. But then my mom got sick, and I had to drop everything to take care of her. After she passed, my son started having trouble at school. Every time I tried to return, someone else needed me more than I needed myself." Abigail felt her throat tighten, not because Letitia's story was extraordinary, but because it was heartbreakingly ordinary, the kind of story millions are quietly living every single day. Letitia looked out the window, watching the slow, steady drops of rain. "Sometimes I think maybe it's okay to just live like this forever. At least my kids still laugh every night." Abigail whispered, "And what about you? Do you ever laugh?" Letitia didn't answer. She simply shrugged, the kind of shrug that belonged to people who'd grown used to sacrificing their dreams without expecting anyone to understand. That night, Abigail sat in her rented apartment and opened her notebook to write a single line. "We don't lose talent because they don't try. We lose them because no one asks how much they're carrying inside." The next day, Abigail texted Letitia and invited her to dinner. She took her to a small diner, then suddenly handed her an envelope. Letitia blinked in surprise. "What's this?" "It's a partial scholarship from the Independent Women's Opportunity Fund. You just need to apply. I'll take care of the rest." Letitia's eyes widened. "How did you even know I—" Abigail gently cut her off with a smile. "I just know one thing: you once had a dream, and I don't think it deserves to die just because no one ever saw your worth.